So last week we saw Naomi move into action. We had seen that she had been in her chaos, that she had had difficulties that had put her into this kind of malaise and fatigue where she's not doing anything and she's not really involved in either her life or Ruth's, and that she has just kind of waited back and let Ruth do everything as she saw fit. But then we saw that she understood their problem after God's grace was poured into her life by Boaz and Ruth's actions, that she then made a plan to deal with it, and then she used the resources that she had, or resource we might say, and understood, hey, I actually have somebody here who cares about me. She saw Ruth for what she is, an opportunity to work out this chaos in her life and do something about it. And then we saw that Ruth obeyed Naomi and goes to the threshing floor in the night, and she was instructed to go there and uncover Boaz's feet and wait. But then we saw at the end of our study there, Ruth kind of improvises, because when Boaz wakes up, he doesn't tell her what to do, as Naomi thought. He instead says, "Who are you?" And so she says, well, he's not telling me what to do, so I'm going to tell him what to do. And that was a very good idea by her, that she decides she is going to ask him to spread his cloak over her, or his wing, we said, and that he is being asked in a somewhat formal way to make her his wife. And so she uses this other word and says, I am here, your servant, who will be your wife if you allow me. So she doesn't just wait, she takes the initiative and she proposes to Boaz. And so we are here at Boaz's response. If somebody could please read verses 10 and 11 of chapter 3. That's 3, 10, and 11.
The Lord bless you, my daughter, he replied. This kindness is greater than that which you showed earlier. You have not run after the younger men, whether rich or poor. And now, my daughter, don't be afraid. I will do for you all you ask. All the people of my town know that you are a woman of noble character.
All right. So Boaz is very grateful for Ruth approaching him. And he again asks God to bless her and says that what she has done now is even better than what she did before. So we have another appearance of one of our key words in the book of Ruth, hesed. And as we have talked about that word several times in the past, we come to the final appearance here. And we talked about this word back in chapter 1 and chapter 2. And in both of those circumstances, we have characters saying that God is showing hesed, that he is showing loving kindness to other people. And so we see that they primarily think of this as something that is from God. But now we have a shift where Boaz says that it is Ruth who is showing this, that it isn't God, but that it is in fact a woman who is acting like God. He even says she has acted with more of this hesed than when she left her people in Moab and followed after Naomi. So how is Ruth acting even more godly now by asking Boaz for marriage than when she left Moab and followed after Naomi? How is she doing that here? How is she showing more of this loving kindness than when she gave up everything? That seems kind of strange, right? She's asking for something that in one way benefits her. So how is it even more loving to do this than when she gave up everything?
When she gave up everything, she kind of didn't know what she was getting into, and yet now she's continuing to do what's necessary to take care of Naomi.
Okay, yeah.
Marry a man.
Yeah, okay.
She barely knows.
Yeah, okay. She's marrying a man she barely knows. Any other ideas?
Went after a young man.
Yeah. I think that's probably the key of what Boaz is saying, is she's closing off all possibilities of the future, right? If she marries this man, we have no reason to believe that Boaz is old enough that she would be able to marry again. And so probably she is going to get married, and that's it. Once she marries Boaz, her life is set for the rest of her life. She now has this man as her husband, and she has no opportunity to do anything else. Even while she has nothing with Naomi, she at least had options, right? What Boaz is recognizing is you had choices where you could have chased after a rich man who was young. We have some indication that the man who she does not choose is exactly that he might have been a younger man who also has wealth like Boaz. But she doesn't chase after this man. She's signing up for whatever life Boaz can give her and Naomi. She's saying, I'm going to follow after you in the same way that she followed after Naomi. She's willing to do anything that she can to help Naomi and her people. And she has recognized God's love in Boaz. I think that's what's going on here. We see it over and over again in how Boaz is acting, that he is treating her with the love of God. And so she's not going to just reject that. She could have said, well, I'm going to take the unknown. But she understands that the known of a godly man is better than the unknown of whatever else these other men might be able to provide her. Because who knows what this man would have been like. If you have a godly man, you had better make sure you hold on to that person. And in the same way, a godly wife, because that person is invaluable. And that's what Ruth is showing us. She is showing Boaz godly kindness in this, that Boaz says. And it's been said by some that kindness is treating people as kin, even though they are not. That you can kind of see it in the word there, kindedness. That's the whole idea in that English word, that you are treating someone as family. That is what godly kindness is really about. Understanding that those people belong to you and you belong to them. And so you are going to treat them that way. Boaz has treated her as part of God's family. She showed up as a foreigner, a widow, and a poor woman who had nothing to really offer to him. And because of that, she decides, I'm going to treat you as family too. I'm going to not skip over you and go after anyone else. I'm going to stick with you because you have shown me this love. And it's the kind of event that makes a tangible impact in our world, right? When somebody shows godly kindness, the world changes. Maybe locally and maybe globally. But there are choices in our lives that shape things far more than we would expect. And as we've said continuously through this story, we see very small choices. This woman who could have picked any of the men in the town or even men in another town picks this man. And so history of salvation, history of a kingdom are shaped because she chooses to show kindness in a godly way. And then Boaz tells her, don't be afraid. We think probably if he's saying that, she must be visibly anxious, right? That's not a normal response to a wedding proposal. Hey, don't be afraid. That's not normally what you have on the videos on social media. When someone gets down on a knee, the woman doesn't usually say to the man, oh, don't be afraid. It's going to be okay. That would be a very different proposal. But that's exactly what we see here, and I expect that that's because Ruth is showing fear. She's showing anxiety. He sees this in her, and he wants to comfort her. And he says he's going to do this for her, not just because of how good she is, not just because of how loyal she is. He says it's because the men have been talking. And we know in the scripture in particular that we have a reputation that women are the ones who do the talking. Whenever the subject of gossip comes up and somebody wants to sharpen their axe, they start talking about all the women who are usually in those Pauline letters, and he says, be careful that women aren't taken in this way or that way. And what the Bible wants you to know, especially in the book of Ruth, as we see so many reversals here, is that men talk too. Men are also back there running their mouths about what other people are doing. They're just usually doing it in a less obvious way that maybe the women aren't noticing regularly. But Boaz says, yep, the men have been talking about you. And so he says, they have been talking enough to say, we all know what you're like. We all know what you've been doing. And the word in verse 11 really means the people at the gates. And as you see in our picture here, this illustration, this is typically what would have happened on a day when you had nothing else to do. You would go to the gates, especially the elders, the more powerful, the influential, and you would hang out in this area that's sort of like a courthouse and a front porch combined. You stay in this place and you greet whoever's coming and going into the town, and you watch all the business that's going on. Because if there's a criminal accusation, if there's a marriage announcement, if there's any kind of land deal, if there's any question about what you should do, you come to this place. And so these men are all there waiting to see what's going to happen, and some of them pretending that they have a reason to be there if they're not in authority. Boaz says that all the higher-ups have been talking about her, and they agree she's a worthy woman. That's what the word really means. So what does it mean for a woman to be worthy? What makes her worthy? Loyal. She's loyal, okay? All right. She's a good wife. What does that mean? Okay. Takes care of her husband. Well, there you go. She had before.
She could be a good wife.
There you go. That's definitely being picked up by the microphone. When you're sitting over there, it can't hear you, but that definitely got on the video. Any other thoughts? What makes a worthy woman?
She's not running around.
Okay.
The other guys, she's not hitting on the younger.
Yeah.
After the younger guys, she's not being a floozy.
Okay. Yeah. So, can anyone think of a place where the Bible talks about this a lot? There we go. Proverbs 31. It's a famous acrostic, they tell us, that in the Hebrew it actually is designed artfully. It's made so that you could easily put that in cross stitch or some other kind of artful pattern, and you could lay that out because it's supposed to be describing what a worthy woman is like. And it uses all of these really artful ways of going through this. And a lot of people through the years have noticed that it's kind of interesting that a lot of what TJ was just mentioning are the same things that Proverbs 31 says. That it says, this woman is supposed to behave this way if she's worthy. And it's amazing how many of those Ruth lines directly up with, even though she's not married currently. She is worthy of being a wife because she is showing it in how she lives. And in fact, in the Hebrew Old Testament, the placement of the book of Ruth is not right after the book of Judges, but right after the book of Proverbs. So, whereas we read it and we're thinking about everyone doing what's right in their own eyes as we come into the book of Ruth, if you're a Hebrew reader, you're going to be thinking about a Proverbs 31 woman, because that's the last thing you have read. And then, here is Ruth, the perfect example of what this looks like. And again, I think that there is no mistake in that. But I often hear women, when this is talked about, this idea of Proverbs 31, talk about it as if it's a checklist. Talk about it as if it's something you're supposed to measure yourself and say, well, wait a minute, how am I doing on all of these things? And you pull that out and you say, well, I think I've got this one and this one and this one, but over here I'm really struggling. I don't like to get up at 5 in the morning. I don't like to work late into the night. I don't want to do all of these things that are this and that, so I must not be a worthy woman. But that's not how God means it to be used. He has no desire in it being used as a club to hit yourself over the head, or especially for someone else to get in front of you and hit you over the head with. That's not the purpose of it. The purpose of it is to celebrate godly women. The point of it is to say, this is what you should be aspiring to. The point is to strive to live God's way. Because women all over this church and all over the world sacrifice constantly for their family. And so God wants to praise that. He wants to celebrate it. They are worthy. And what are they worthy of? Well, certainly celebration, but more importantly, imitation. You are supposed to be seen by other people. They're supposed to talk about these things just the way that these men at the gate were talking about what Ruth has been doing. The women should be talking about that. They should in the church be saying, hey, did you notice that that woman has been getting up real early constantly to take care of her kids? That shouldn't be one of those things where you say, oh, well, that's just what you're supposed to do. You should say, that's wonderful to hear. I'm very grateful for that. Because the more times we say that just should happen on its own, the less of it we get. In our society, the basics keep going down and down and down because people just assume they are going to happen that way. But it's not, because it's very difficult. Trying to live the way Proverbs 31 tells a woman to live is impossible on your own, right? You're not going to be able to do all of that. Without God's help, you have no chance in the world. And so you should be aspiring to it. You should be looking at that and saying, well, what should I be doing to try to improve on that? You shouldn't feel it as some kind of oppressive thing that makes you think, oh, well, I guess I'm never going to do that one. You should say, God, how will you help me to be able to get closer to what you want me to be like? How can I be like this woman over here? How can I be like that woman who does this or that? They hold up a standard and proclaim to everyone, this is the way, walk ye in it, right? And obviously, this isn't just something for women to do. That's one of the challenges when we have these role reversals. We tend to read this because the Bible so often talks about men and men and men and men. And when we see the word women, we sometimes have people get excited and we say, oh, well, that's only for the women. Well, clearly not. In fact, we're supposed to be learning the lessons from each other constantly. We're supposed to be striving to be closer and closer to God's vision for us. And so it's no mistake that Boaz is using a feminine form of the same word that was used about him. When Boaz says she is a worthy woman, it's exactly the same as what Ruth has said earlier. Not the character, but the book of Ruth has earlier said that Boaz is a worthy man. When it says he is a man of strength, it is saying he is a worthy man in the Hebrew. Exactly the same word. And so we have these two side by side. We have Ruth as the example of what women should be aspiring to, and Boaz as the example of what men should be aspiring to. And that sounds like a match made in heaven, right? It sounds incredible that we have two of these worthy people that have happened to line up, as the book of Ruth tells us. And here they are, having a proposal in the midnight of the threshing floor. And then Boaz says, yeah, that sounds like a really good idea. I'd love to accept your proposal in principle. And then he says, there's a problem. If somebody could please read for us verses 12 through 13.
And now it is true that I am a redeemer, yet there is a redeemer nearer than I. Remain tonight and in the morning, and he will redeem you. Good, let him do it. But if he is not willing to redeem you, then as the Lord lives, I will redeem you. Lie down until the morning.
All right. So we don't know very much about this character, this other redeemer that we are hearing about. We will hear more about him next week as we study chapter 4, but we really don't get much information about this guy. But he's mentioned here, in part, I think, as evidence against the idea that we have a midnight tryst at the threshing floor. As we talked about last week, we said there is certainly no evidence that these two are seducing one another or trying to do anything physical here, that this is a marriage proposal. And one of the pieces of evidence here is that these two have just been called worthy in a godly sense, and then they are immediately mentioning this other man. So Boaz says, yes, I would love to marry you, but before I can, there's this other man. Well, to me, if he is thinking of this man in this moment, he has certainly not just had an intimate encounter with this woman. That's not going on. It is very clear to me that this evidence swings towards the innocent portrayal. And as soon as Ruth proposes, he tells her to wait all night, and he will ask the other man in the morning. Now, why does Boaz need to do this? He has had months for this other man to come to Ruth and propose, to either Naomi or Ruth. So why couldn't Boaz just skip over this guy?
That's not the right thing to do.
Yeah.
So he's got honor and dignity.
And that's difficult, right? That guy had all this time, and it would be very easy to assume and say, well, we have a connection. We already have this emotion that is tying us together. And our society is all about emotion. When it comes to love, it's all about feelings. People say, I don't feel like I'm in love with you anymore. They don't realize that the scriptural and godly portrayal is that your love is your choice at all times. And that's a very difficult thing for us because we do have those feelings, right? God gave us feelings to connect us with these people, and it's very easy to follow those and say, well, I have feelings and that rules over everything else. But Boaz is a man of strength. He's a worthy man. And he says, yeah, I have feelings for you. I just confessed them to you. I want to marry you, and I know that you are worthy of being my wife. But there's a problem. I have to deal with this because the right thing always comes first. Even if you have feelings that you think are so intense, you got to do the right thing. You got to consider the needs of others. As we just studied in our study of Philippians in our last class together, Paul warns you, don't be thinking about your own needs. Don't be considering what you want, what you might need, but think about what other people need. That's hard. It's very difficult to get into the pattern, to get into the habit of when you have a need, thinking, does somebody else have a right to this before me? Because that's not how we are trained to think. We're trained to believe if I can have it and I want it, it's mine. But God says, think about other people. He says, slow down, consider if there is someone in the way. And that's exactly what Boaz decides he's going to do, to not trample someone else's rights. Now, I'm sure that Ruth is struggling with Boaz's response, right? As we've said, this is not the typical portrayal of a proposal. You've got the woman who seems to be visibly shaking, and you've got the man who says, yeah, but hang on, let me ask first if another guy wants to marry you. That's not going to be in many romance movies, right?
That would cause me to walk out.
And most people, right? If the man says, well, what if this other guy wants to marry you? Well, fine. I don't want you anyway. I'm not doing this. She's risked everything, and he says, all right, but first wait at my feet for hours, and then I'll get up and worry about this. Now, it's not surprising to me that it doesn't say Ruth slept at all, right? It says she was to lay there, but I don't think there's much resting going on. On even the best of nights, I struggle to quiet my mind and fall asleep. I know there are some of you that can struggle with insomnia, and as the thoughts spin through your mind, it can really make it difficult to get to sleep. But if I'm anxious about something, I'm probably not going to sleep at all. If there's something that needs to be decided, if there's something that I think, oh man, in the morning this is going to change, I'm just going to be thinking about that over and over and over. And as I sit there, it's very easy to just spin your wheels on it and think, man, I'm so angry that I can't get over thinking about this thing. And the more upset you get about it, the less restful it is, right? Because the more you work yourself up, the more your brain is awake and says, well, I guess we're just going to lay here and we're going to think about this. So I can't imagine how difficult those hours were for Ruth. At about midnight, she gets an answer, and it's not until dawn that she gets to get up. So she has to lay there 5-7 hours and wait and just sit there. Naomi is seeking rest for Ruth, right? That's what we said at the beginning of chapter 3. She said, should I not seek rest for you? And here Ruth is completely restless. She's at the feet of this would-be husband. But first, the opposite of rest, anxious waiting. So what should you do if you're forced to anxiously lie awake at night?
Pray.
Okay, pray. I think you might have gone with pray, all right? Anybody else? Sorry, I can't hear. Read the word, yeah. Consider what God said. Other ideas?
Worship.
Yeah, praise. I think sometimes you should be planning, right? You should be thinking about what you might actually be able to do. Not just contingencies and worst case scenarios, but preparing yourself for what God might be doing. You're given the time to build patience. And man, we don't like that, right? When God says, okay, you got 5 hours, here you are. When you're driving down I-75 and there are trucks that are on both lanes in those 2-lane sections, and they're decided that they're going to go 55 and 56 uphill, and you know you've got 15 to 20 minutes before one of them actually passes the other one, you can get really upset. Or you can take the moment and say, wait a second, God has gifted me time to build patience. He's given me the opportunity to do something. Because we don't take that time, right? It's very difficult to build patience on your own time. And so God gives you that time. He says, here is a time when you can't do anything else. All you can do is wait. And as you wait, you can pray, you can praise, you can prepare, but mostly be patient. Mostly focus on trusting. Mostly yearn for the Spirit. Because we're told that patience is a fruit of the Spirit, right? It's not something you can build on your own. It's not something you can try hard enough to do. It's something that the Spirit does in you as you work with Him. Ruth had one very important blessing that she could dwell on in these hours. She's going to get remarried. Now, that doesn't sound that great when you're in Ruth's position, right? Because you came in risking everything into the middle of the night. You did this spy mission where you're tiptoeing around all of these men who are on the threshing floor. You've been completely undetected. You've successfully woken this man up. You've proposed to him, and he has said, yes. And then he says, but. And in that moment, I'm sure that everything goes from soaring exaltation to disappointment, to anxiety. Because that morning, if you had told her before Naomi spoke, hey, Ruth, you're going to be guaranteed a husband by the end of the day, she's probably been pretty thrilled. But if you tell her at this point, it might not be Boaz, that's really tough, right? Because we set our hearts on things. Because we decide what we should have, and then we determine that's what we're going to have. And sometimes God says, nope, it's going to be this other way. And even in that moment, that anxiety, that tension, you have an opportunity to trust God or not. To say, God, I accept this, even if it's not who I want, even if it's not what I want. That's a real challenge for your faith, right? If you have two choices in front of you, and it looks like it might be the one you don't want, that's a faith builder. It's an opportunity for you to say, God, your will, not mine, be done. That's a challenge for us. We are promised security by God, but we often find it hard to rest in it, right? And then finally, morning comes for all of us. Even if you've laid awake from 8 o'clock at night all the way until 5 or 6 in the morning, eventually morning shows up. And it seems like the whole thing changes, right? Everything you thought about, all the worries that you had, all of it is suddenly lifted, at least to a large degree, because you know that the time for decision has finally arrived. So if someone could please read for us verses 14 and 15.
So she lay at his feet until morning, but got up before anyone could be recognized. And he said, "No one must know that a woman came to the threshing floor." He also said, "Bring me the shawl you are wearing and hold it out." When she did so, he poured into it 6 measures of barley and placed the bundle on her. Then he went back to town.
All right, so I noticed that your translation uses then he went back to the town, and other translations will say then she went back to the town. The reality is that both of them go back to the town, if you wonder about that. And so we don't have any kind of a textual problem. We just have a pronoun that is eliminated. And so the translators have to guess which one is meant, but in reality, both. And so we see that Boaz is concerned about both of their reputations. He has accepted this proposal, and then he says, you know what? Somebody might get the wrong idea about what's happened here. You have stayed here overnight because I told you to, but if somebody sees you creeping out of here, they might have the wrong idea. So they probably have to both stay up all night, right? If you just think through it, how are you going to wake up before it's dawn when you have no vibrating phone? Who's going to do that? Has to be you, right? At least one of them, probably both of them, have to just lay there. I don't know what they were doing. Maybe they were making small talk. Maybe they had to nudge one another and say, hey, I think you're snoring. Wake up. We don't want to get caught here. We didn't do anything wrong. We certainly don't want to suffer consequences. But they are awake, and then in comes the very first of light. But Ruth had come to Boaz in the dark, so that leads to the question, why didn't he just send her back out into the night? Why didn't he just say, you know how we can guarantee you don't get caught? Go home the way you came in.
Dangerous for a single woman to be walking around in the dark.
Yeah. Boaz understands that what she did was risky. he's already treating her like his wife, right? He knows that if she goes back out there, it's even worse, right? If you've ever watched any police shows, you know the later into the night you get, the more the weirdos come out. The people that get up at 9 o'clock and start fooling around are different than the people that get up at 2 in the morning and start fooling around. And Boaz probably is aware that the weirdos are even worse right now. So he doesn't want them to get after to Ruth. He is concerned about her. We are told at the end of verse 15 that he or she went into the city, so obviously the threshing floor is outside the city. That means, as most translators and commentators think, that probably she has to walk for 3 to 4 miles. That's a long way in the middle of the night. Boaz knows that he needs to protect her, even if it puts his reputation on the line. It would have been easier to say, hey, you came here, you made it, go on out. But he shows godly love. And he says, no, you need to wait here until somebody could see you, until people are out on the road and you could be protected. And then he gives her some barley, as he has before. And we don't know exactly how much he gives her, because in the Hebrew it simply says 6 barleys. Now, there are people who will argue he gives her 6 grains of barley. Well, that would certainly be a symbol if he were to give her that. But that's almost certainly not what's going on. I think what's probably happening is Boaz has some kind of a scoop, maybe his hand, something else, and he's just scooping it up and putting 6 measures, whatever those were, into her garment. And the point isn't really the barley, but what it represents. Because this is almost certainly a down payment, a kind of dowry. Because what we find is that he does not say, this barley is for you to go home and eat. He says, this is for Naomi. You are supposed to take this as payment. He's signaling first fruits to Naomi. This gift is for her and not for Ruth. He's pledging to redeem not just Ruth, but Naomi as well. And he's showing her in a tangible way that he's going to provide for both of them. He's promised, but now he's making the promise tangible, edible even. Promises are wonderful, but it's far better to have more, right? I love the promises of God. Those testify to us as very little else can. But why is it so important for you to have something more than the promise? Why is it important for you to have something you can experience? Yeah. Others?
Would be incredibly frustrating to have the spirit hang on
Yeah. Because we're fundamentally like little children at Christmas, right? We haven't experienced heaven. So all we get told is, it's coming. And we get really excited about that. And then eventually, we haven't gotten there. And so if it lasts long enough, we can say, will it ever be here? Is heaven coming? Are we going to get to it? Or is this just a promise that we've been given? That's why we have the first fruits. The scripture tells us the Holy Spirit is the first fruit, is the promise, is the deposit. God has given you himself. He has given you eternity, infinity in your heart, so that you know that you are going to him. Because God didn't just come to you, he is with you and in you, so that you know you are going to him. Christians are told that everything we have in Christ is just a foretaste, just a simple appetizer. All of us have probably been to a nice restaurant, and you order an appetizer, and you get that thing, and it's delicious, and it's the most amazing thing you've had all week. And then your main dish comes, and you go, why didn't I have the appetizer first? Why did I have the appetizer first? That was way better than what I had. The appetizer is often better than the entree. It doesn't make sense, right? We don't want that. And some of us think that that's how God's going to treat us. That we are going to experience something that's worse than what we have now. We think that this is the best we're ever going to experience. We have people who will say, wow, I had such a great week. Wow, this is such a great experience. And they'll talk about these earthly experiences as if they're the best things that will ever be. But they're like the worst appetizer you've ever imagined. Because heaven is going to so far exceed everything that you have ever experienced that's joyful that you can't comprehend it. That's what the Bible tells us. You haven't even been able to think about how much better things will be compared to what you're dealing with now. The very best time you've ever had in your life isn't even going to be memorable compared to what you'll experience in heaven. Then Boaz continues on his mission and Ruth hers. If someone can read for us verses 16 through 18.
When she came to her mother-in-law, she said, "How did you fare, my daughter?" Then she told her all that the man had done for her, saying, "These 6 measures of barley he gave to me. For he said to me, 'You must not go back empty-handed to your mother-in-law.'" She replied, "Wait, my daughter, until you learn how the matter turns out, for the man will not rest till we settle the matter today."
All right. So Boaz has gone into the city, and then Ruth separately goes back into the city to return to Naomi. And then Ruth tells us a part of the conversation happened that we didn't get recorded, where Boaz told her, "You must not go back empty-handed to Naomi." And so he gives her this barley. And this idea here that she must not go back empty-handed is the exact language from another part of Scripture. In Deuteronomy 15:12 through 15, God says that when someone is freed from service to someone else, they must not be released empty-handed. If you have someone who is your servant, and it is time for them to be set free, you don't just say to them, "All right, thanks for your service. You're free. I hope you have success, and I'll see you later." You are supposed to be helping them far more than that. Because we're supposed to show others that we know that our blessings come from God. And so we have this command that when you give someone their freedom, you are to give to them liberally from what God has blessed you with. That you are supposed to load them up with whatever you can afford to give to them. You're supposed to show them the generosity, the kindness that God has shown to you. And so this principle applies to us too, right? When God sets you free, He does not set you free and say good luck. He does not look at you with sin and the burden of death and say to you, "Oh, well, I'm going to take that away from you." That would be amazing, right? If God was to say, everything that would be a penalty to you, I'm going to remove, and that was it would be cause for eternal celebration. Because we could never free ourselves. But God tells us, this is what my love is like. I don't just set people free, I give liberally to them. And in that, there's a totally different experience. When you're set free by Christ, you aren't set free to go back to sin. God doesn't just free you, He gives you all that you need. The Bible is one story told through many characters. It's the story of God's love for us. That's why there are so many connections throughout it. Here we see many connections to God's desire to redeem, to be your Father. Deuteronomy 15 tells us in verse 15 that you should remember that you were a slave in Egypt. It's pointing back to the Exodus. And so Ruth is also pointing back to the Exodus. We see that it happens in the middle of the night, right? In the threshing floor, exactly as the people of Israel are freed in the middle of the night. We see that they are not leaving empty-handed, right? That they are given the treasures of Egypt, as Ruth is given this barley, a symbol of what is to come. And are Ruth and Exodus both stories of redemption, that someone is buying someone else. In the Exodus, certainly God buying His people and Boaz purchasing Ruth and Naomi here. So we see these connections that keep happening over and over because the Scripture is this one story of God's love. And in verse 17, we have the last words that Ruth speaks in our book. And we have 2 weeks left. And so you know we will not be using Ruth's words for the remainder of our study. And then in verse 18, we have Naomi's last words that are spoken in our book. They will not speak again, nor do they make any further choices in our story. Ruth has been the protagonist, the one who moves the story forward, and Naomi the central character that everything revolves around. Naomi's last words in the book are that Ruth has to continue to wait. Either Ruth or Naomi could have decided to meddle, right? It would have been very possible for them to be in this situation, to be in all the difficulty, and to decide, you know what? I'm going to put my hand in that. I'm going to go over there and I'm going to mess around with this. One or both of them could have gone to either Boaz or to the other kinsman, right? They could have gone over there and said, hey, just let you know, this is what's been going on, and we want to make sure you understand things from our perspective. We want to make sure you know what we really feel. That would have been very easy. It would have been simple for them to go over there and meddle. We have no idea what would have happened if they had done that. They are only in this hope-filled position because they've acted, right? They've acted in ways that typically women in this world don't. They kept doing things with their own initiative. Naomi had been pushing Ruth to obey her crazy plan. Ruth's been a woman of action. She followed Naomi for Moab. She swore this oath. She gleans for months, and then she improvises on the threshing floor. But Naomi says it's everyone's least favorite time again. Time to wait. Ruth has just come from hours of waiting at Boaz's feet. And then as soon as she arrives and tells what has happened, Naomi says, okay, it's time to wait. Let's see. For most of us, waiting is one of the most frustrating things we're asked to do, and that leads to our question of the week that we asked last week. How do you know when you should get involved and when you should wait on God?
Pray about it.
Okay, yeah, you have to pray about it. Absolutely.
Because sometimes God will speak to you and other times.
Okay. But how do you know? What sometimes he wants you to step out and wait. You got to faithfully wait. How do you know which way?
You try to do it on your own and it keeps failing.
Okay. That's definitely one sign. And that's not something that we should feel bad about. If we look in the book of Acts, that's exactly what Paul does on his missionary journey. When he is going around Asia Minor, we are told over and over again that he tries to go one way and then another way and then another way, and each time it tells us the Holy Spirit prevented him. So Paul was trying to go out and do things his own way, and God said, nope, you're not doing those. And God could have told him right then. He could have said, hey, Paul, this is what you're supposed to do. As Cheyenne said, we should pray. You think Paul prayed? Yeah, I bet he did. And I bet God didn't say anything. Because if he had, I bet Paul would have obeyed. So, Paul tries to act. So how do you know? Other ideas. As Amanda said, maybe you just keep banging your head against something. How do you know? Are you supposed to wait? Is there anything that could give you a sign, a signal, other than just a direct revelation?
Other believers
Okay.
check in with folks who are also praying and
Yeah.
wise.
I think even through the word.
Yeah.
You're praying and all of a sudden you're reading something, it's like, ain't another word, you need to wait.
Yeah.
Or with years, like you said, through other people.
Sure.
You need to wait. Okay, better wait.
Yeah. I think one of the challenges for us is that we want there to be a one-size-fits-all for these kind of things, right? We want to understand a set of things we should always do, and then we will know what we should do in any situation. But we are supposed to, according to the Scripture, learn from what God has already brought us through, right? If he's brought you through something, then you probably have some idea. He's built that experience into your life, and he's built experiences into other people's lives. And in those circumstances, when you're not sure if you should stay or you should go, you need to talk. You need to say, hey, this is what I'm feeling. This is how I've been dealing with this, and I'm really not sure. And maybe someone can say, oh, I was in that situation, and it was just like this. And maybe that will be the perfect answer. But I find that sometimes they say it was just like this, and then I go, wait a minute, that doesn't feel right. And that's frustrating, right? Because God is building you as you have those experiences. He's getting you into a relationship where He wants you to constantly come back and check. He's asking you to talk to Him, right? He's asking you to seek wisdom and discernment. That's a gift of the Spirit, right? Discernment is a gift. And how do we get those gifts? Does God just give them without any petition? Sometimes. Sometimes not. Again, a challenge for us. There are people who, at the age of 12 or 13, receive a gift of the Spirit, and they haven't been seeking anything. And they will have that for their whole life. And yet, Paul tells us in Corinthians, seek earnestly all the gifts of the Spirit, especially that you should prophesy. But we will continue in understanding we are supposed to earnestly be seeking the gifts of the Spirit. If you want to be able to discern things, that's not something you should just say to God, okay, God, I want to be able to discern. To earnestly seek is as if you've lost $1,000 in your wallet and you know it's somewhere around the house. I bet you're going to go find it. There are very few of us who know that we've lost $1,000 and we would say, well, I'll get to it one day. Maybe next week I'll start looking. You're probably going to look until you find it, right? Earnestly seeking means keep pushing. Come to God and say, I want this. Keep asking. That's how you're going to be able to prepare yourself for these times. And then when you start moving, pay attention. Because if you notice in that story I told you in Acts, it doesn't say that Paul reached a point into a city and said, that feels wrong. And then he went ahead. Because many times we find ourselves in a problem, not because we took the first step, but because we kept going past the point. Because there will be a point in your life where even if you haven't heard God, He'll speak louder. And when He speaks louder, you have that option of saying, God, I think you're talking to me. Or you can say, well, it's time for action, and I'm going over that way. I've already packed. I'm heading this direction. It's already halfway there. I may as well go on down this road, and then eventually I'll see what happens. Disaster every time. Because if God warns you when you're halfway there, turn around. If He warns you when you're 99% of the way, turn around. You need to be listening to God the whole time as you move. Once you have decided, I can't wait any longer, move slow. Don't rush forward. Pay attention to what God is doing. And so Naomi has paid attention to what God is doing. She tells Ruth, hey, you're going to have to wait. But this is going to be settled by the end of the day. This isn't a problem you're going to have to wait until next year for. You're not going to wait a week. This man is determined. I've been around enough men. I know what God is like. This is going to be settled before the end of the day. She's confident in Boaz's promise to Ruth. Boaz has given his word, and the word of a worthy man is worth a lot. Patience is a lot easier if you know the purpose and the plan, right? If you understand where you're going, what's happening, you're so much happier. If we go back to those traffic scenarios, when it's a standstill, what you'll see again and again is people get out of their car and they climb on the foot running boards or some part of it, and they're looking around and they think, if only I could know what's up there. No, that's not going to change anything for you, right? There's no chance that you're going to move faster because you can see what's happening. But you still want to know. The vast majority of people want to see what's ahead. They want to know, why am I waiting? And let me have some idea. Are there 4 fire trucks or 14? We don't know what's happening. We have a real problem. But more important than what Boaz says is what God has said. We don't know which of the promises of God Naomi and Ruth knew. If you know the promises of God, they can help put your chaotic mind to rest. It's a wonderful practice to read the promises of God over and over again. It's great to read the whole Bible, and I encourage you to do that. But take out some of the promises of God that are really comforting to you. List them and read them. And if you can, memorize them. So that when you're in those positions, when you're anxious, when you have chaos in your life, you'll be able to tell yourself, hey, wait a minute, I have a promise. And those promises will witness to you. But even if you don't know the promises of God, God still made them. That's the amazing thing about God. You don't have to know anything but Him to benefit from His promises. Ruth is directly benefiting from the promises of God. Without God, there's no law, there's no Redeemer, and there's certainly no rest. He promised to take care of the poor, the widow, and the foreigner. And God has promised to take care of all of us if we let Him. The Lord promises that those who wait on Him renew their strength, right? A confidence that the God who redeemed you will provide you all you need. So these women continue to teach us about the fight against chaos. We have examples of worthy men and women. We're supposed to watch them and learn from them. And then we are taught that we shouldn't be wasting the waiting time. When you recognize that you have that point where you have to wait, don't complain. Spend as little time as possible being angry about it. And then get into the waiting. Say, God, thanks. You gave me what I would have never given myself. Time to do these things. To pray, to praise, to prepare. And He has given you the first fruits. Earnestly seek the gifts. The Spirit is the deposit. He testifies to you of what's coming. He guarantees that heaven is real and that you're going there if you cling to God. Pay attention to God in your life and you'll know when to walk and when to wait. Are there any questions or comments?
You were talking about the gridlock and when it sees so far ahead. Remind me of Psalms 119, 105. Your word is a lamp for my feet and a light on my path. And a lot of times when you read that, you think, oh, it's a lamp that shines a bright light out in front of me. Where it's really talking about the oil lamp of that day, which would have only allowed light up to like.
Yeah.
And it's interesting if we look at it in that context that even His own word will only give us.
Yeah, I think that's a great insight. I think we get ourselves into a lot of trouble if we know future more than we should. Anytime we get focused on those things, or even possibilities, we end up in a lot of mess. It's easy for anxiety to overwhelm if you're looking at next year or 10 years down the road or whatever else. Other thoughts? All right, well, our question of the week for next week is there a right person that each Christian should marry? So there you go. Next week. Is there a right person for everyone? And what happens if you get the wrong one? So, who will close us out? Who will close us out in prayer?